Welcome back to the Golden Ancient Tales, the home of timeless stories, forgotten legends, and powerful histories brought vividly to life. Today, we travel back over 2,000 years to witness one of the most dramatic conflicts of the ancient world, a war fought between an ambitious king from the east and the mighty Roman Republic. This is the Pontic Wars, a tale of strategy, rebellion, betrayal, and the fight for supremacy between King Mithridates VI of Pontus and Rome itself. Before we begin, please subscribe, like, and drop a comment telling us your favorite ancient war or hero. Your engagement keeps these ancient stories alive. Now, let's begin the journey. Long before the Roman Republic learned to fear his name, before his armies swept through Asia Minor, and before his defiance shook the foundations of the world's greatest empire, Mithridates VI of Pontus was simply a prince, a boy growing up in a palace filled not with warmth, but with danger. His story begins along the stormy shores of the Black Sea, in a rugged land of mountains, thick forests, and ancient Greek settlements. This was the kingdom of Pontus, a realm both wild and wealthy, a place where Greek culture met Eastern tradition, and where kings ruled with ambition tempered by constant threat. And in the heart of this kingdom lived a family at war with itself. Mithridates was not born into peace. His father, King Mithridates VI, had ruled with intelligence and diplomacy, balancing Pontus between the powers of Rome and the Eastern kingdoms. But when the king was suddenly poisoned during a feast, a murder that remains unsolved to this day, chaos erupted in the royal palace. The Queen Lucullus assumed regency over the kingdom, ruling on behalf of her young sons. But she favored Mithridates' younger brother, and many believed she wished to eliminate the older child to secure her own power. Whispers filled the palace corridors. Watch the boy's cup. Guard his plate. Another servant has vanished. Mithridates, still a child, grew up knowing that every meal might be his last. Rather than breaking him, this fear forged him into something extraordinary. Determined never to be a victim, he studied herbs, minerals, and natural toxins. Slowly, carefully, he began consuming tiny amounts of poison, training his body to endure what would kill an ordinary man. Each dose was a gamble with death, but Mithridates survived every one. Historians later called him the Poison King. But he was much more. At the age of about 14, when he could no longer trust anyone, Mithridates vanished from the palace. In the dead of night, he fled into the remote forests and mountains of Pontus, leaving behind his family and the dangers of court life. For years, he lived among the wild tribes and nomadic peoples of the Black Sea region. He hunted in the deep forests, slept beneath cold stars, and trained his body to endure the harshest conditions. He wrestled with Scythian horsemen, learning their deadly archery skills, the ability to shoot accurately while riding at full speed. It was during these years that Mithridates grew tall, strong, and fearless, earning respect from warriors twice his age. The boy who had once been stalked by assassins was becoming a man who feared no blade. He read the histories of great conquerors, especially Alexander the Great, and believed destiny had set him apart. He would not be a pawn of fate. He would be a challenger of empires. When Mithridates returned to his kingdom, he did so in silence. The city of Sinope, Pontus' brilliant coastal capital, was alive with trade, music, and gossip, and no one expected the exiled prince to walk through its gates unannounced. By this time, his mother and brother had grown careless. They believed Mithridates was still hiding in fear or dead in some forgotten forest. But the prince walked into the palace boldly, surrounded by the loyal companions he had gained in exile. The moment he appeared, the balance of power shattered. The nobles, the soldiers, the people, most of them saw in him a true king, not the weak, indulgent rule of his mother. Within days, he seized the throne. Queen Laodice was removed from power. His brother was stripped of authority. For the first time since his father's murder, Mithridates ruled Pontus completely. From the moment he sat on the throne, he began planning something greater than mere survival. To most kings of the Black Sea, Rome was an unavoidable fate, a giant whose shadow grew longer with every passing year. Rome demanded taxes, influence, and obedience. Many rulers submitted, but Mithridates believed Rome had grown arrogant. He saw opportunity in the discontent of the Greek cities suffering under corrupt Roman governors. Merchants complained of unfair taxes. Farmers groaned under the weight of debt. Greek pride had been insulted again and again. Mithridates positioned himself as their champion. He traveled to Greek towns, offered protection, lowered taxes, and treated the people not as subjects but as partners in his vision. In turn, they began whispering his name with admiration. He married into powerful families across the region, securing alliances not through force, but through diplomacy. His charisma was magnetic, his intelligence undeniable. People said he spoke 22 languages, the tongues of every people he ruled. To the tribes of the mountains, he was a warrior. To the Greeks, a liberator. To the eastern courts, a rising power. Slowly, a coalition began to form: Greeks, Anatolian tribes, Black Sea pirates, and nomads, all gathering behind one man. At the same time, Rome had become increasingly distracted by internal conflict. The Republic was divided by rival politicians, violent street mobs, and power-hungry generals. Pontus was far away. Mithridates was underestimated, and Rome's corruption made the eastern provinces ripe for revolt. Mithridates saw what others feared to see. This was the perfect moment to strike. But first, he needed one more transformation. Mithridates reshaped the Pontic army into a force worthy of legends. He reorganized infantry into disciplined phalanxes, trained cavalry in Scythian archery tactics, and hired skilled Greek generals. He equipped soldiers with strong armor, fast horses, and deadly weapons. But his greatest strength was loyalty. His soldiers saw him fight beside them, bleed beside them, suffer the cold and hunger they endured in the mountains. To them, he wasn't just a king. He was a leader worth dying for. And so the world turned its eyes eastward when rumors spread that the young king was massing armies at the borders, speaking boldly against Roman oppression. A new threat was rising, ambitious, fearless, and unpredictable. In taverns, marketplaces, and military camps across the Mediterranean, people whispered the same question: who is this Mithridates who dares to challenge Rome? The answer was simple. He was a tiger of the East, and his war had just begun. For decades, the Roman Republic had stretched its influence across Asia Minor, not through kindness or mutual respect, but through domination, taxation, and exploitation. The beautiful Greek cities lining the Aegean coast, once proud centers of art, philosophy, and commerce, now found themselves crushed beneath the weight of Roman greed. And Mithridates VI, the new king of Pontus, watched all of it quietly. He understood something Rome did not. People who suffer long enough will look for a liberator. Oh, a traveler in Asia Minor during this time, Rome's presence was unmistakable. Wealthy Roman tax collectors strutted through marketplaces like lords, demanding payment for debts that never seemed to end. Corrupt governors auctioned off justice to the highest bidder. Greek merchants were forced into bankruptcy. Farmers lost their land. Widows and orphans were dragged into slavery for unpaid levies. Rome called it administration. The locals called it oppression. In city after city, Ephesus, Pergamon, Trolley, Smyrna, frustration simmered like boiling water. Philosophers debated Roman cruelty in shaded courtyards. Merchants whispered complaints in taverns. Farmers muttered curses beneath their breath as they reaped grain that would not feed their own families. Mithridates listened. He sent envoys disguised as traders and sailors, gathering stories of Roman abuses. And everywhere, the message was the same: give us a leader brave enough to stand against Rome. Mithridates knew he had to become that leader. Pontus grew stronger by the day. Mithridates had forged alliances with Greek cities, Thracian tribes, and Black Sea pirates. He built harbors, trained armies, and crafted propaganda portraying himself as a savior of Hellenic people. To the Greeks, Rome had become the new barbarian. To them, Mithridates was a new Alexander. He sent gifts to cities, freed debtors, and held banquets celebrating Greek culture. The message was clear: I am one of you, and I will fight for you. Rome, distracted by civil wars and political chaos at home, paid little attention. But under their noses, a storm was gathering. The exact moment the plan was set in motion is lost to history. But ancient writers tell us this. Mithridates gave a secret order, a command whispered in the shadows, delivered not through generals, but through trusted agents, merchants, actors, teachers, ship captains, people who could pass unnoticed in Roman-controlled lands. The order was simple and chilling. On a single day, in every city of Asia, rise against the Romans. Leave none alive. It was a calculated move, designed not merely to attack Roman soldiers, but to cripple Roman presence completely. If the Greek cities wanted freedom, they would have to seize it in blood. Then came the day that would be remembered with horror and awe across the ancient world. In the year 88 BC, as the sun set over the Aegean Sea, Rome went to sleep in Asia Minor believing itself secure. Roman merchants counted their profits. Roman officials planned new taxes. Roman families relaxed after feasts, confident in their dominance. They never saw it coming. At a predetermined moment, possibly marked by a messenger, a torch, a code word, the cities erupted. In Smyrna, Roman residents were dragged from their beds. In Ephesus, they were hunted even in the temples. In Pergamon, crowds stormed Roman villas. In Tralles, slaves turned on their masters. Those who tried to flee to the sea found ships blocked by Mithridates' allies. Those who sought refuge in sacred places were denied sanctuary by their own Greek neighbors, a horrifying sign of how deep resentment toward Rome had grown. Ancient historians claim that 80,000 to 150,000 Romans and Italians were killed in a single coordinated uprising. Whether the number is exaggerated or not, one fact is certain. The Asiatic Vespers was one of the greatest political massacres in ancient history. It was brutal. It was shocking. It was irreversible. And it changed everything. When news reached Mithridates, he did not react with surprise. The uprising had gone exactly as he planned. He immediately offered protection, tax relief, and military support to the cities that participated. In return, they declared him the liberator of Asia and showered him with loyalty. But the reaction in Rome was thunder. The Senate exploded in fury. This was no longer a rebellious province. This was no longer a troublesome king. This was an atrocity, one that demanded retribution. Politicians shouted in the Senate House, calling for revenge. The people demanded a war to avenge their dead. Rome had suffered humiliations before, but never on this scale, never with such cold precision. All eyes turned toward one man, a commander known for his ruthlessness, brilliance, and ambition, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. As Rome prepared for war, Mithridates was at the height of his power. Across the Greek world, people celebrated him as a hero, a man who dared to do what others feared. Statues were erected. Cities sent envoys with gifts. His armies grew rapidly as volunteers from all over Asia Minor joined his cause. He minted new coins bearing his proud face beside the symbols of Greek freedom. He sent fleets to control the Aegean Sea. He appointed governors loyal to Pontus in newly liberated territories. For a moment, it seemed as though Mithridates had accomplished the impossible. He had carved a Greek-led empire from the ashes of Roman tyranny. But with every victory, a shadow grew longer across the horizon, the shadow of Rome's inevitable response. The Senate declared that Mithridates had committed a crime against the Republic itself. No treaty, no negotiation, no diplomacy would be enough. Rome would unleash its legions. The greatest military machine in the ancient world was coming. Not to negotiate, not to threaten, but to destroy the king of Pontus and erase his rebellion in blood. Mithridates knew the war had properly begun. A storm was marching toward him, and he would need every soldier, every ally, every ounce of cunning to stand against it. The massacre across Asia Minor had been swift, brutal, and unforgettable. As the smoke settled over now liberated Greek cities, Mithridates VI upon us stood as the most powerful enemy Rome had faced in the East in generations. But power invites response. And Rome's response came in the form of a man as ambitious, cold, and unyielding as Mithridates himself, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla was not born into wealth or prestige. He carved his own legacy through battlefield brilliance and calculated brutality. His pale blue eyes and calm smile hid a dangerous truth. He was a man who believed destiny had chosen him for greatness. When Rome decided to punish Mithridates, there was no question who should lead the campaign. Sulla had already proven himself in wars against Jugurtha and the Italian rebels. He was fearless, cunning, and absolutely merciless toward Rome's enemies. But there was a problem. Rome was descending into political chaos. Rivalry between generals, bitter disputes between senators, and violent clashes in the streets slowed preparations for the campaign. Yet Sulla refused to wait. He marched to Greece with a small but hardened force, not enough to easily defeat Mithridates, but enough to begin the fight. While Rome struggled with internal strife, Mithridates expanded his influence even further. He sent a mighty general, Archelaus, into Greece with a large army and fleet. Greek cities, still bitter from Roman exploitation, opened their gates willingly. The people celebrated the Pontic banners waving in the wind, believing Mithridates was the true heir of Alexander the Great. Athens, ancient, proud, and rebellious, welcomed Mithridates' forces with open arms. The city had not forgotten Rome's heavy taxes and harsh rule. Now they saw a liberator. Archelaus established his headquarters in Athens, reorganizing the defenses of the region. He believed the Greek mainland would rise fully against Rome, and for a moment it seemed possible, but only until Sulla arrived. Sulla reached Greece in 87 BC. What he saw shocked him. Mithridates' banners flew over Athens, Piraeus, Boeotia, and most of southern Greece. But Sulla was not a man who panicked. He began his campaign with one of the harshest decisions any Roman commander had ever made. Rome had no money to fund the war, so Sulla took it from the Greeks. He seized the sacred treasures of Delphi. He melted down gold and silver statues. He stripped temples of their offerings. To Sulla, war required sacrifice, and Greece would pay it. His army, now financed and equipped, marched directly toward Athens. Athens, the birthplace of philosophy and democracy, now found itself at war with the greatest military force in the ancient world. Sulla began building siege towers, rams, and trenches. His soldiers cut down entire forests around the city to fuel the war machine. The Athenians fought fiercely, led by Archelaus' officers, but Sulla's discipline and experience were overwhelming. Food inside Athens began to run out, then water, then hope. Ancient writers describe scenes of horror, parents sharing scraps with starving children, dogs and horses butchered for food, people searching the walls for edible weeds, corpses piling in the streets. Sulla, watching from his camp, remained unmoved. He had a message sent to the Athenians. You chose Mithridates. Now face the consequences. But the Athenians refused to surrender. Night after night, the Romans pounded the walls with battering rams and catapults. Fire arrows lit the sky. The city shook with every impact. And then, one cold winter night, Sulla ordered the final assault. The Roman legionaries breached the walls near the sacred gate. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Sulla allowed his men to storm the city with full fury. The Athenians fought desperately, but exhaustion and starvation had broken them. Archelaus' forces fled toward the port of Piraeus, leaving Athens to its fate. By morning, the ancient streets were filled with the bodies of warriors and civilians alike. When Sulla entered Athens, he walked calmly through the ruins, speaking only a few words. I forgive the living for the sake of the dead. It was a chilling statement, mercy drowned in blood. But the war was far from over. Archelaus regrouped his forces at Piraeus, where Mithridates' powerful fleet waited. Sulla realized that unless he captured Piraeus, Mithridates would keep sending reinforcements into Greece. The Roman siege of Piraeus became a brutal tug-of-war. Sulla built siege towers. Archelaus burned them. Sulla dug trenches. Archelaus filled them with archers. Sulla cut off supplies. Archelaus smuggled in food by sea. The port city held out for months. Meanwhile, Mithridates dispatched new armies under generals Taxiles and Dorolaus, who marched into northern Greece. But Sulla was faster. He abandoned the siege of Piraeus, marched through Greece, and intercepted the Pontic forces at Coronea, the ancient battlefield where Philip of Macedon had once defeated the Greeks. Now, another great battle was about to unfold. The Pontic army was massive, tens of thousands strong, with warside chariots, cavalry, and heavy infantry. But numbers alone do not win wars. Sulla had veterans, disciplined, ruthless veterans. The battle erupted with the thunder of chariots charging toward Roman lines. The Romans opened their ranks, letting the chariots pass harmlessly through, then cut down the drivers. Then came the infantry clash, shield smashing, swords clanging, dust rising in choking clouds. Sulla's tactics were flawless. He maneuvered his legions in tight formations, outflanking the larger Pontic army. By afternoon, the field was covered with thousands of dead. Pontus had been crushed. But the next year, Mithridates sent another huge army. Sulla defeated it too, at the Battle of Orchomenus, another decisive Roman victory. The message was clear. Sulla had broken the back of the Pontic invasion in Greece. After these defeats, Archelaus sought peace. Mithridates, unwilling but cornered, agreed. The terms were harsh. Mithridates would surrender all conquered territories. He would hand over dozens of ships. He would pay a massive fine. He would free Roman prisoners. And he would personally bow to Roman authority. It was humiliating. But Mithridates knew he could not face Sulla directly. Not for now. Sulla, needing to return to Rome's civil war, accepted the treaty. The First Pontic War was over, but both men knew the conflict was far from finished. Their rivalry had only begun. The First Pontic War had ended, but there was no peace in Mithridates' heart. Rome believed it had humbled the king of Pontus. Rome believed it had broken him, stripped his power, and forced him to kneel. But Rome understood little about Mithridates VI. For a man who survived poison, treachery, and exile, humiliation was simply another challenge to overcome. And while Sulla marched back to Rome to plunge into political warfare, Mithridates returned to Pontus with a single burning truth. He had lost the battle, not the war. The Greek cities had suffered. Pontus had suffered. But Mithridates refused to let his people taste defeat. The moment his treaty with Sulla was signed, he began rebuilding what Rome had broken. He restored loyalty through action. He reduced taxes. He rewarded soldiers who survived the war. He rebuilt destroyed towns. He rearmed the Pontic army with improved weapons and armor. He forged alliances with the tribes of Armenia and the steppe. He strengthened diplomatic ties with Tigranes the Great, his powerful son-in-law and the rising star of the East. He rebuilt his navy with sleek, fast ships. He trained new archers, new cavalry, new units modeled on Rome's own legions. Rome thought Mithridates was defeated. In truth, he was sharpening his claws. For several years, Rome had its hands full with internal chaos, revolts, political assassinations, and constant civil conflict. But as the dust settled, Rome looked east again, and what it saw disturbed it. Mithridates was growing stronger. His alliances were expanding. His wealth was increasing. And above all, he was acting like a king who had not learned his lesson. Rome needed a new hammer, a commander as relentless as Sulla, but colder, more calculating. That man was Lucius Licinius Lucullus. Lucullus was unlike most Roman commanders. He was educated, refined, almost aristocratically calm. He loved poetry, philosophy, and luxury, a man who recited Greek verses before battle. But beneath this polished exterior was a strategist of terrifying brilliance. Where Sulla was fury, Lucullus was precision. Where Sulla crushed cities, Lucullus starved them. Where Sulla embraced brute force, Lucullus preferred intelligence, patience, and psychological warfare. When the Senate appointed him to command against Mithridates, Lucullus accepted with quiet determination. He studied every detail of the previous war. Every mistake Rome made, every victory Mithridates won. Lucullus was ready, and he was coming. Around 74 BC, the region plunged into turmoil again. The death of Nicomedes IV, king of Bithynia, triggered a crisis. In his will, Nicomedes left his entire kingdom to Rome, an act Rome welcomed but Mithridates saw as a direct threat. Bithynia sat right next to Pontus. If Rome controlled it, they would be positioned at Mithridates' doorstep. Mithridates acted first. He launched a swift invasion of Bithynia, pushing Roman forces out and reclaiming the territory. As he did, Greek cities cheered. Once again, he positioned himself as the champion of the East. Rome declared war immediately. Lucullus marched. Mithridates expected Lucullus to come head-on. After all, that was the Roman way. But Lucullus moved differently. He attacked Mithridates' supply lines, destroyed his warehouses, and intercepted his communications. He forced the Pontic army to keep moving, never allowing them to settle or gather strength. Like a wolf circling an unwary stag, Lucullus wore his enemy down. Mithridates responded with his usual brilliance. He fought with hit-and-run tactics, using terrain to his advantage. His cavalry harassed Lucullus constantly. He launched ambushes, cut roads, and tried to trap Rome in unfamiliar territory. The two commanders studied each other, tested each other, respected each other. This was no longer Sulla crushing a rebellion. This was a duel between two minds. In 73 BC, Mithridates made a bold move. He besieged the city of Cyzicus, a wealthy port loyal to Rome. But Lucullus saw not an opportunity, but a trap. He marched his forces into the mountains around the city and surrounded Mithridates' army without the king realizing it. The hunter had become the hunted. Suddenly, the great Pontic force, tens of thousands strong, found itself trapped between the city walls and the Roman encirclement. Lucullus did not attack. He did not waste soldiers. He simply cut supply lines and watched. Starvation crept in. Winter storms battered the camps. Diseases spread like wildfire. Mithridates tried breakout after breakout. All failed. The once glorious Pontic army withered. Thousands died. Thousands deserted. Thousands froze in the winter winds. It was one of the most devastating encirclements in ancient history. Mithridates barely escaped alive, slipping away in a small boat across the stormy waters of the Propontis. Cyzicus was Lucullus' masterpiece. Rome roared with approval. Pontus reeled in shock. Weakened but not broken, Mithridates retreated into the mountains of Pontus and regrouped. His resilience was unmatched. But Lucullus gave him no rest. The Roman general pursued him relentlessly, defeating him again and again at the Rhindacus River, at Cabra, in multiple mountain skirmishes. Lucullus captured Pontic strongholds, seized royal treasuries, and freed towns that had suffered under the war. Mithridates' power began to crack. His armies dwindled. His allies wavered. His nobles began whispering betrayal. But the king refused to fall. Cornered and nearly defeated, Mithridates made a bold decision. He fled to Armenia, seeking refuge with his son-in-law, Tigranes the Great, ruler of one of the largest empires in the East. Lucullus, seeing the escape, made a decision that stunned Rome. He marched into Armenia without permission. No Roman general had ever done such a thing. But Lucullus was determined to end Mithridates once and for all. Pontus was in ruins. Its people were exhausted. Its king was gone. Yet the war was not over, because in Armenia, a new storm awaited, one that would engulf three great kingdoms and push Rome to the edge. The clash between Lucullus, Mithridates, and Tigranes would soon become one of the most dramatic confrontations of the ancient world. After years of relentless pursuit, Mithridates VI of Pontus had fled to the court of his powerful son-in-law, Tigranes the Great, king of Armenia. His kingdom of Pontus was battered, his armies depleted, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had survived Sulla's legions, endured the encirclement at Cyzicus, and escaped Lucullus' relentless hunts. Now he hoped to rebuild, stronger than ever. But Lucullus was not a general who allowed enemies to recover. Tigranes ruled an empire stretching from the Taurus Mountains to the Euphrates. Wealthy, populous, and militarily strong, Armenia seemed like a sanctuary for Mithridates. The king provided him with men, resources, and the promise of a second chance at war. But there was a catch. Tigranes was cautious. He had no desire to provoke Rome unnecessarily, and Rome's legions were already on the march, and Lucullus' reputation as a brilliant general had reached the ears of every Eastern monarch. Yet Mithridates pushed forward, gathering mercenaries, Armenian cavalry, and Greek hoplites. His vision was audacious. He would retake Asia Minor and strike at Rome's holdings in the east. Lucullus, understanding the threat, moved decisively. He knew the key was to strike the Armenian heartland before Mithridates could fully consolidate. Lucullus led his army north, through mountains, rivers, and harsh terrain. His legions, battle-hardened by years of fighting Mithridates' forces in Pontus and Asia Minor, were disciplined, relentless, and precise. Mithridates expected Rome to hesitate, as it had in the past. But Lucullus did not hesitate. He marched directly toward the Armenian capital, Tigranocerta, a city built as a jewel of the East, stocked with wealth and defended by tens of thousands of soldiers from Armenia, Pontus, and allied states. The stakes were enormous. If Tigranocerta fell, Mithridates' last major base of support would collapse. If Lucullus failed, the East might unite under Mithridates and challenge Rome's supremacy permanently. Tigranocerta's army was vast, reportedly over 70,000 soldiers, including heavily armored infantry, skilled archers, and a formidable cavalry force. Mithridates' men, still loyal despite repeated defeats, were confident in their numbers. Lucullus' army, by contrast, was smaller, perhaps 30,000 disciplined Romans, including legionaries who had fought the Pontic Wars for years. But Lucullus had a secret weapon: strategy, discipline, and the ability to turn numbers into weakness. The Romans encamped within striking distance, careful to study the terrain, the enemy's formations, and the morale of Tigranes soldiers. Lucullus knew that victory depended not on sheer force, but on tactical brilliance. The armies met on an open plain near Tigranocerta. At first, it seemed the Armenians had the advantage. Their cavalry charged with thunderous speed, archers rained arrows upon the Romans, and the sheer size of the army intimidated even the seasoned legions. But Lucullus had anticipated this. He arranged his legions in a flexible formation, with the ability to absorb cavalry charges while counterattacking at the right moment. The Roman manipulator system allowed him to rotate units, keeping fresh soldiers in front while tired men rested behind. When the Armenian cavalry attacked the flanks, Lucullus feigned weakness, pulling back sections of his army to lure the enemy into overextension. The Pontic and Armenian forces, confident in their numbers, surged forward recklessly, and then Lucullus struck. The Romans unleashed a sudden, coordinated counterattack. Archers, slingers, and javelin throwers targeted enemy leaders and the most exposed formations. The legionaries surged forward in tight blocks, cutting through the enemy ranks with discipline and precision. Chaos erupted among Mithridates' allies. Confusion spread across the massive army, amplified by the uneven terrain. Communication broke down. Cavalry units collided with infantry. Morale plummeted. Tigranocerta's defenders, watching their army crumble, began to panic. Within hours, the vast numerical advantage of Mithridates and Tigranes collapsed into disorder. The Romans, disciplined and deadly, exploited every weakness. Lucullus' men stormed the city walls. Armenian defenders, already demoralized, offered little resistance. The gates fell, the treasures of the city were seized, and Lucullus secured a decisive victory. Tigranes' army scattered, leaving Mithridates' forces exposed. The Pontic king managed to escape with a small number of loyal followers, but his dream of using Armenia as a base for revenge was shattered. This battle was more than a military victory. It was psychological warfare. Lucullus had demonstrated that Roman discipline could defeat even the largest, most confident armies. Mithridates had lost not only soldiers but credibility, and Tigranes had learned that aligning too closely with him could invite Rome's wrath. Mithridates retreated north, back into Pontus, exhausted but still defiant. His army was depleted. His treasury was diminished. His allies were terrified of further Roman retribution. Lucullus, triumphant, continued pressing the advantage, moving to reclaim Pontic cities, fortresses, and supply lines. Rome's dominance in the east appeared unassailable. Yet, even in retreat, Mithridates' cunning remained unmatched. He knew Lucullus could not occupy every corner of the rugged Pontic terrain. He began planning guerrilla attacks, secret alliances, and the slow rebuilding of his power. The stage was set for one final confrontation, a battle that would test the limits of loyalty, strategy, and ambition. Despite overwhelming losses, Mithridates remained a figure of legend. He had survived defeat after defeat, escaped death countless times, and continued to inspire loyalty among those who had not yet abandoned him. Rome had won the field, but the war itself was far from over. Lucullus had proven Rome's superiority, but the shadow of Mithridates still lingered over the east. For every city Lucullus captured, Mithridates' legend grew. To his enemies, he was a desperate fugitive. To his followers, he was a tiger of the east, still alive, still dangerous, and still a threat to the might of Rome. And so, the Second Pontic War dragged on, with the east trembling between Roman might and Pontic cunning, until a new general would rise to continue the chase, a man who would push Mithridates to the very edge of defeat. By the time Mithridates VI returned to Pontus after his near-fatal defeats in Armenia, his kingdom was a shadow of its former glory. Cities had been plundered, fortresses lay in ruins. His armies had been shattered by Lucullus in a series of devastating campaigns. Even his allies in the east had begun to waver, fearful of Rome's relentless advance. Yet Mithridates was unbowed. His spirit, sharpened by years of exile, betrayal, and blood, remained unbroken. He had faced poison, assassins, and the might of Rome itself, and survived. But a new storm was approaching. Rome, recognizing the need for a decisive end to the Pontic Wars, sent Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great. Pompey was a commander of extraordinary ambition, skill, and vision. His reputation preceded him. Undefeated in battle, feared by enemies and admired by Rome. Unlike Lucullus, who had relied on meticulous strategy and patient attrition, Pompey combined speed, intelligence, and ruthless efficiency. He was a hunter who never rested, and Mithridates knew that facing him would be unlike any previous Roman general. Pompey's orders were clear: destroy Mithridates' power in the east once and for all. Mithridates' strategy had shifted. Instead of engaging Rome in open battle, he relied on guerrilla tactics, harassment, and the natural defenses of his rugged homeland. He moved swiftly through mountain passes, marshes, and forests, striking Roman forces when least expected, then disappearing into the wilderness. For a time, it worked. Pompey struggled to locate the elusive king. Roman supply lines were vulnerable. Mithridates' reputation for cunning seemed intact, but Pompey adapted quickly. He secured loyalty from local tribes, rebuilt supply lines, and blockaded key ports along the Black Sea. He cut Mithridates' communications and isolated his forces from potential allies. The tiger was cornered. Pompey's campaign was relentless. The general pursued Mithridates from the coast of Pontus to the mountains of Armenia, cutting off every safe haven. Cities that had once welcomed Mithridates now refused him entry, fearful of Rome's wrath. Pompey's strategy was simple: strike where Mithridates was weakest, deny him supplies, and force him into open battle. Unlike Lucullus, who had sought victories of attrition, Pompey aimed to destroy the Pontic king's power entirely. Mithridates, realizing that the walls of his kingdom could no longer protect him, devised a desperate plan. He would rebuild his army in secret, rally nomadic tribes, and march west and confront Rome directly in Asia Minor, possibly even threatening Roman territory itself. But fate, as ever, conspired against Mithridates. Years of war, deprivation, and constant flight had eroded loyalty within his own family. His son, Pharnaces, saw an opportunity. Ambitious, impatient, and eager to claim the throne, he secretly negotiated with Pompey. Mithridates' closest advisors warned him, but the king, always wary of treachery, underestimated the threat. Pharnaces' betrayal would become one of the final blows to the Tiger of the East. Pompey moved quickly to capitalize on the betrayal. He captured key fortresses and cities that had once served as safe havens for Mithridates. Small skirmishes erupted across Pontus, each victory tightening the noose around the Pontic king. Mithridates' forces, exhausted and demoralized, were unable to resist the disciplined, well-supplied Roman legions. Guerrilla attacks no longer worked. Villages refused shelter. Tribes feared reprisal. The king, once the master of cunning, was forced into open engagement, precisely where Pompey wanted him. Mithridates' dream of reclaiming Asia Minor, of standing against Rome's might once more, began to crumble. Cities fell, armies dissolved, and allies abandoned him. Pompey's reputation alone inspired fear, forcing surrender after surrender. Even the great king of Pontus, who had survived poison, exile, and betrayal, could not withstand the weight of Rome at its most determined. Pharnaces' treachery sealed the fate of Mithridates. The son's forces, once loyal, joined Pompey or surrendered entirely. The Pontic king found himself with only a handful of loyal followers. He fled to the mountains, a shadow of his former self, hunted by the very empire he had once dared to defy. Cornered, demoralized, and surrounded, Mithridates resolved to end his own life. Throughout his life, he had trained his body to resist poison, consuming deadly toxins regularly to build immunity. But now, In a cruel twist of fate, the poisons he had mastered failed to kill him. His body, conditioned for survival, would not yield. In despair, he turned to his most loyal guard, ordering him to deliver the death he could not achieve himself. The guard complied, ending the life of the man who had challenged Rome for decades. Mithridates' death marked the collapse of Pontic resistance. Pompey secured the east, reorganized the territories, and established Roman control over Asia Minor, Armenia, and the Black Sea coast. Rome had triumphed, but the legacy of Mithridates endured, a king who had resisted the greatest empire of his age, a strategist and warrior of unparalleled cunning, a survivor who had evaded death countless times. Historians will remember him as the Poison King, the Tiger of the East, and the man who dared to defy Rome itself. Yet even in defeat, Mithridates' legend inspired fear, admiration, and stories that would echo through history for centuries. The East, once a land of fragile kingdoms and rival kings, was now firmly under Roman influence. Pompey's campaigns reshaped borders, established client states, and ensured that Rome's reach extended from the Aegean to the Black Sea. But the memory of Mithridates lingered. In the villages, cities, and mountains of Pontus, people still whispered his name. He was not merely a defeated king. He was a symbol of defiance, resilience, and cunning. The war was over. The Tiger of the East was gone. But his story and the lessons of ambition, strategy, and courage would live on forever. The dust had settled across Asia Minor. Cities lay scarred, fortresses in ruins, and battlefields littered with the remnants of once mighty armies. The Pontic kingdom had been defeated. Mithridates VI, the indomitable Tiger of the East, was no more. Yet, even in death, his story refused to fade. Pompey the Great had achieved what generations of Romans had struggled to accomplish. He had crushed the threat of Pontus and brought the eastern Mediterranean firmly under Roman influence. Territories were reorganized, client kings installed, and Roman legions stationed to prevent further uprisings. Rome celebrated its triumph, boasting of the defeat of the so-called Poison King, who had dared to challenge the Republic itself. Coins were minted, statues erected, and songs sung in honor of Roman might. Yet, the East remembered Mithridates differently. To the people of Pontus and the Greek cities he had liberated, he was not a tyrant. He was a hero. He had stood against Rome, giving them a vision of freedom, dignity, and defiance. Even after repeated defeats, his name inspired courage. Mithridates' life had been shaped by one obsession: survival. From a boy avoiding poison in the palace to a king training his body to resist toxins, he had mastered the art of cheating death. Even at the end, when he attempted suicide, he proved that his life was a testament to resilience. The poisons that were meant to claim him failed, and only the hand of a loyal guard delivered the final act. His death, while tragic, cemented the legend: a king who could not be killed by the tools of the ordinary man, a survivor who defied fate itself. Though Rome emerged victorious, Mithridates had left a mark on the Republic. His rebellions revealed vulnerabilities in Roman strategy, highlighting the dangers of overextension and political complacency. The Senate realized that the East was volatile, that allies could quickly become enemies, and that even the greatest empire could be challenged by a single determined ruler. Pompey's campaigns against Mithridates became a blueprint for how Rome would handle revolts and client kingdoms in the future. Roman generals studied the battles of Chaeronea, Cyzicus, and Tigranocerta, learning lessons in strategy, logistics, and diplomacy that would influence military thinking for generations. Across Pontus and beyond, Mithridates' legend endured. In Pontus, he was remembered as a king who stood tall against Rome, restoring dignity to his people and defending his homeland. Statues and temples were erected in his honor long after his death. In Greece, the liberated cities recalled how he had championed their freedom, even if temporarily, and celebrated him as a defender of Hellenic culture. In Rome, despite his defeat, generals and historians admired his cunning, intelligence, and audacity. He was feared, yes, but respected. Mithridates became a symbol of resistance, a ruler who showed that even the mightiest empires could be challenged by courage, strategy, and ambition. The Pontic Wars were more than battles and sieges. They were a story of human ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of power. Mithridates VI taught the world that cunning can rival force. Even against Rome, the most powerful empire of the ancient world, intelligence and strategy allowed a smaller kingdom to rise. Loyalty is fleeting. Family, allies, and subjects could betray, making the survival of a kingdom as much about trust as about strength. Resilience matters. Mithridates' ability to endure poison, exile, and defeat inspired generations, proving that survival is both physical and mental. Legends outlast empires. Rome conquered Pontus, but the story of the Tiger of the East would echo for centuries, a warning and an inspiration. With Mithridates gone, Rome consolidated its power. Provinces were reorganized. Trade flourished under Roman stability. Greek cities, once oppressed, became administrative centers, and Roman law reshaped local governance. Yet, even under the Pax Romana, the shadow of Mithridates lingered. Traders, soldiers, and travelers would speak his name in whispers, of a king who dared to challenge Rome, survived assassination attempts, and outwitted generals long before his final defeat. Mithridates VI was more than a warrior or a strategist. He was a survivor, a visionary, and a symbol of defiance. His ambition to stand against Rome, even when the odds were impossibly stacked against him, inspired fear, respect, and admiration. He embodied the idea that one person, guided by intelligence, courage, and sheer determination, could shake the foundations of an empire. And while he ultimately fell, his story became a cautionary tale for rulers, generals, and empires alike. Centuries later, historians, poets, and storytellers will recount the tales of Mithridates the Great. His childhood, poisoned by fear but strengthened by survival. His rise to power, defying family and rivals alike. His audacious massacres, campaigns, and confrontations with Rome. His repeated escapes from death, the betrayals he endured, and his ultimate demise. Through these tales, Mithridates became immortal, not as a conquered king, but as a legend of resilience, cunning, and indomitable will. The Pontic Wars changed the eastern Mediterranean forever. Rome's dominance was solidified. Kingdoms were reshaped, yet the memory of Mithridates VI endured, a reminder that even the mightiest empire can face threats from the most determined individuals. The Tiger of the East had roared. He had fought, survived, and challenged the world. And though the empire endured, the legend of Mithridates would live forever, inspiring generations to dream, resist, and fight against impossible odds.